Sefka's fingers moved slowly across the ancient data crystals. Dust had settled on them long ago, and no one had touched this section of the Great Archive in perhaps 100 years. The young Velthrani archivist worked alone in the dim light, her silver eyes reflecting the soft glow of forgotten records. She was not supposed to be here. Her assignment was to catalog trade agreements from the previous century, boring documents that no one would ever read. But Sefka had always been curious about things she was not supposed to know. That curiosity had brought her to the deepest level of the archive, where the Galactic Concord kept records of species that no longer mattered. The crystal in her hand was labeled simply, Sol System, Pre-Threshold Species, Quarantine Status, Permanent. Sefka inserted the crystal into her reader and watched as images flickered to life before her. She saw a small blue planet, beautiful and fragile, floating in the darkness of space. Oceans covered most of its surface, and white clouds swirled above green and brown continents. It was the kind of world that made you want to visit, to breathe its air and feel its sun on your skin. The records showed that this planet was called Earth by its inhabitants. Humans, they called themselves, a young species, barely a few thousand years into their civilization when the Concord first detected them. They had discovered radio waves and began sending signals into space, hopeful messages asking if anyone was listening. Someone was listening. The Concord heard everything. Sefka watched recordings of those early transmissions, mathematical sequences meant to prove intelligence, music and images encoded in radio waves, and strangest of all, physical probes carrying golden discs with pictures and sounds from their world. The humans had attached messages of greeting, maps showing their location, and recordings of their languages and music. They had sent these primitive vessels into the void like bottles thrown into an ocean, hoping someone would find them. The innocence of it made Sefka's heart ache. She found the records of the Concord's debate about Earth. 300 years ago, the 47-member species had gathered to discuss what to do about the humans. The recordings showed representatives from across the galaxy arguing about the fate of a world that did not even know it was being judged. The Korvathi delegate spoke first. His species was old and proud, warriors who had conquered half the galaxy before choosing peace. He argued that humans were too dangerous. Their own broadcasts revealed a species constantly at war with itself. They had weapons capable of destroying their entire world, and they had come close to using them several times. Allowing such a species into the galactic community would be like inviting a fire into a house made of paper. The Melhari representative disagreed. Her people were scientists and philosophers who believed in the potential of all intelligent life. Yes, humans were violent, but they were also capable of great beauty. Their art, their music, their literature showed a species struggling to become better than their worst instincts. Given time and guidance, they could evolve into something wonderful. The debate continued for many cycles. Some wanted to make contact and guide humanity toward peace. Others wanted to destroy them before they became a threat. Most simply wanted to ignore them and hope the problem solved itself. In the end, the Concord chose the coward's path. They voted to quarantine the Sol System. No contact would be made. No help would be offered. Monitoring stations would watch from a distance. But humanity would be left alone to either destroy itself or somehow survive long enough to prove it deserved a place among the stars. The quarantine was not meant to be permanent. Every century, the Concord was supposed to review the situation and decide if humanity had changed enough to warrant contact. But centuries passed, and the reviews never happened. Other matters seemed more important. New crises demanded attention. The monitoring stations were reassigned to other duties. Earth was forgotten by everyone except archivists like Sefka, digging through old records that no one cared about anymore. Sefka moved forward through the timeline, searching for more recent data. She found automated reports from the monitoring probes, dry technical documents filled with numbers and measurements. For 200 years, the probes had recorded humanity's progress. The humans had reached their moon. They had sent robots to other planets in their system. They had built space stations and launched thousands of satellites. They were growing, learning, reaching outward despite no one answering their calls. Then, suddenly, the records stopped. Sefka checked the dates twice to make sure she was reading them correctly. The last comprehensive scan of Earth was taken 100 years ago. After that, there was nothing. The monitoring probes had either failed or been reassigned, and no one had bothered to replace them. But there was one final entry in the records. A damaged probe, drifting at the edge of the Sol system, had detected something before it went offline. A transmission from Earth, powerful and clear, broadcasting on all frequencies. The probe had tried to record it, but its systems were failing. Only fragments of the message had been captured before the probe died. Sefka opened the fragment and listened. Static filled her ears, harsh and crackling. Then, through the noise, she heard a voice. It was speaking a human language, one she did not understand. But the translation software built into her reader began to work. Words appeared on her screen, broken and incomplete. To any who receive this message, we know you are there. We have always known. More static. Sefka leaned forward, straining to hear. We waited for you. Hoped you would come. But you never did. The voice was calm, almost peaceful. There was no anger in it, no accusation. Just a quiet sadness that made Sefka's chest tight. Our time is ending now. But before we go, we wanted you to know. Static consumed the recording again. Sefka adjusted the settings, trying to pull more clarity from the damaged data. For a moment, the voice returned, clearer than before. We forgive. Then silence. The recording ended, and Sefka sat alone in the dark archive, staring at those two words on her screen. We forgive. What did that mean? Forgive what? Forgive whom? And what had happened to humanity? The voice had spoken of ending, of time running out. Had they destroyed themselves after all, just as the Korvathi delegate had predicted? Had war or disease or disaster claimed them? Sefka knew she should report this to her supervisors. This was exactly the kind of discovery the archive existed to preserve. But she also knew what would happen if she did. Some elder bureaucrat would mark the file as reviewed, add a note saying the humans had apparently gone extinct, and store the record away where it would never be seen again. No one would investigate. No one would care. Because no one had cared for 300 years, Sefka made a decision. She copied the records onto her personal device, hiding them in encrypted files where no one would think to look. Then she left the archive and walked through the great halls of the Concord's capital station, past representatives from dozens of species who were busy with their important affairs. None of them noticed the young archivist with silver eyes and a troubled heart. She found Councillor Veth in his private chambers, an elder Velthrani who had once been kind to her when she was just a student. He listened patiently as she explained what she had found, showing him the records and playing the fragment of humanity's last message. When it was over, Veth was quiet for a long time. This is troubling, he finally said. But I am not sure what you expect me to do about it. Someone needs to investigate. Sefka replied. We need to know what happened to them. We need to know what they were trying to tell us. Veth shook his head slowly. The humans were a pre-threshold species, Sefka. They were never members of the Concord. Whatever happened to them is sad, perhaps, but it is not our responsibility. We made it our responsibility when we chose to quarantine them. We watched them struggle and did nothing. We heard their calls for contact and stayed silent. How can we just ignore their final words? The councillor looked at her with tired eyes. Because that is what the Concord does, young one. We protect ourselves first. We always have. The universe is vast and dangerous, and we cannot save everyone. Sefka left his chambers feeling angry and defeated. But she did not give up. Over the following weeks, she sought out others who might listen. Scientists who studied extinct civilizations. Historians who specialized in pre-threshold species. Military officers who had grown tired of politics and remembered what it meant to do the right thing. Most turned her away, but a few listened. A few looked at the records and heard the fragment of that final message, and felt something stir in their hearts. Guilt, perhaps, or curiosity, or simply the need to know the truth. One of them was Thane, a retired Korvathi commander with gray scales and scars from battles fought long ago. He had spent his life following orders, doing what the Concord asked without question. Now, in his final years, he found himself wondering if any of it had mattered. I will go with you, he told Sefka after watching the records. I want to know what happened to them. I want to hear what they had to say. Within a month, Sefka had gathered a small crew. Scientists, engineers, soldiers, and dreamers. All of them willing to travel to a forgotten corner of the galaxy to find answers that no one else wanted to seek. Their ship was old and small, borrowed from a sympathet. The journey to Sol took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of traveling through empty space, far from the busy trade routes and populated systems of the Concord. The crew spent their time preparing equipment, reviewing old records, and quietly wondering what they would find when they arrived. Sefka stood at the observation deck most evenings, watching stars drift past like distant lanterns. She had never been this far from home before. The silence of deep space was different from the silence of the archive. It was heavier, older, filled with secrets that no one had ever uncovered. Thane joined her one night, his heavy footsteps announcing his presence before he spoke. The old Korvathi moved slowly now, his joints stiff from age and old wounds. But his eyes were still sharp, and his mind was still clear. "You should sleep," he said, standing beside her at the viewport. "We will arrive soon, and you will need your strength." "I cannot sleep," Sefka admitted. "Every time I close my eyes, I hear that voice. Those words, 'We forgive.' What did they mean by that?" Thane was quiet for a moment. Perhaps they forgave each other. Humans were always fighting among themselves. Maybe at the end, they finally made peace. That is not what it sounded like. The voice said, "We know you are there." They were talking to us, Thane, to the Concord. They knew we were watching, and they forgave us for doing nothing. The old soldier grunted softly. "That would make them better than us. When my people were young, before we joined the Concord, we would have destroyed anyone who abandoned us. Forgiveness was not in our nature. Maybe it was in theirs." Thane turned to look at her, his gray scales catching the starlight. "You admire them. These humans you have never met. I admire what I have seen in the records. They were so young, so hopeful. They reached out to the stars expecting to find friends. Instead, they found silence. And somehow, despite everything, their last words were words of forgiveness. Yes, I admire that. I do not know if my people could do the same." The conversation ended there. But Sefka thought about it for the rest of the journey. She thought about what it would take for a species to forgive the galaxy that had abandoned them. She wondered if she could do the same, if she were in their place. On the final day, the ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel and entered the Sol system. The crew gathered on the bridge, staring at their sensors and viewports as data began flowing in. The first thing they noticed was the outer planets, gas giants with swirling storms and dozens of moons, exactly as the old records described. Nothing unusual there. But as they traveled deeper into the system, they began to see things that made no sense. The asteroid belt was wrong. According to the old surveys, the belt should have been a chaotic collection of rocks and debris, leftovers from the formation of the solar system. Instead, the sensors showed something impossible. Millions of asteroids had been moved, rearranged into geometric patterns that stretched across millions of kilometers. Perfect circles, spiraling arms, mathematical sequences carved into the void itself. "This is not natural," whispered Mira, the Delthani scientist who served as the expedition's chief researcher. Her 3 eyes blinked rapidly as she studied the data. Someone did this. Someone reorganized an entire asteroid belt. The humans? Thane asked, "Who else?" "There are no other species in this system, but the technology required to do this is beyond anything in the Concord. Moving this much mass, positioning it with this precision. We could not do this. None of us could." Sefka felt a chill run through her. The old records had described humanity as a primitive species, barely capable of reaching their own moon. What she was seeing now told a very different story. They continued inward, past the red planet with its ancient dust storms, past the rocky worlds closer to the sun. And finally, they saw Earth. It was exactly as beautiful as the old images had shown. Blue oceans sparkled in the sunlight. White clouds drifted across green continents. The planet looked alive, healthy, vibrant. But the sensors told a different story. No radio signals, no electromagnetic emissions, no heat signatures from cities or vehicles, no signs of technology at all. And no life signs. "I do not understand," Mira said. adjusting her instruments again and again. The biosphere is intact. Plants are growing. Animals are moving. But there are no humans, not one. Billions of them lived here, according to the records. Where did they go? Thane leaned forward, studying the tactical display. Could they have evacuated? Left the planet for somewhere else? To where? We saw no colonies in the outer system. No stations, no ships, nothing. Sefka made a decision. We need to go down there. We need to see for ourselves. The landing was smooth. They sat down in a wide field near what the old maps called a major city. Grass grew tall around the ship, wild and untended. In the distance, towers rose against the sky, their surfaces clean and undamaged, but utterly silent. Sefka was the first to step outside. The air was clean and fresh, carrying the scent of flowers and growing things. Birds sang in nearby trees. Insects buzzed through the sunlight. It was peaceful, beautiful, and deeply wrong. They walked toward the city, their boots crushing grass that had not felt footsteps in centuries. The towers grew larger as they approached, and Sefka began to see details that the sensors had missed. The buildings were intact, but their windows were dark. Streets stretched between them, empty of vehicles or pedestrians. Everything was preserved, maintained, as if someone had carefully prepared it for visitors who never came. It is like a museum, Mira whispered, a monument to a civilization that no longer exists. They explored for hours, moving through empty streets and silent buildings. They found homes with furniture still in place, kitchens with tools and dishes waiting to be used. They found schools with books on shelves and playgrounds outside. They found hospitals, libraries, theaters, all of them empty but perfectly preserved. Nowhere did they find bodies. Nowhere did they find signs of violence or disease or disaster. The humans had simply vanished, leaving behind a world that looked like they might return at any moment. It was Thane who found the archive. The building stood in the center of the city, a massive structure of glass and stone that had once been a great library. Inside, rows of shelves stretched into the darkness, filled with books and data crystals and storage devices of every kind. And in the center of the main hall, a single pedestal held a device that glowed with soft blue light. A message, Sefka breathed. They left a message. She approached the pedestal slowly, her heart pounding. The device was simple, clearly designed to be understood by any species. A single button waited to be pressed, and symbols etched into the surface spelled out words in dozens of languages. To those who came looking, Sefka pressed the button. The device hummed softly, and then a voice filled the hall. It was the same voice from the fragment, the calm and tired voice of a human woman speaking words that had waited 100 years to be heard. If you are hearing this, you came too late to help, but perhaps not too late to learn. The crew gathered around the pedestal, their eyes fixed on the glowing device. Sefka barely breathed as the message continued. My name is Elena Vasquez. I am one of the last of my kind, and I have waited a long time to speak these words. I do not know who you are. I do not know which species will find this message, or how many centuries will pass before someone comes looking. But I know that someone will come eventually. Curiosity is a gift shared by all thinking beings. The voice paused, and Sefka heard something that might have been a sigh. You probably have questions. Where did we go? What happened to us? Why did we leave behind a world so carefully preserved? I will answer all of these things in time. But first, I need to tell you a story. The story of humanity's final century, and the choice we made when our time came to an end. 300 years ago, we sent our first signals into space. We were young and hopeful, desperate to know if we were alone in the universe. We dreamed of meeting other civilizations, of learning from them and growing alongside them. We imagined friendship stretching across the stars. We did not imagine silence. Elena's voice grew heavier, weighted with old sadness. But we were not as alone as we thought. We detected your probes watching us. We intercepted your communications and learned your languages. We discovered the truth that you tried to hide from us. You knew we existed. You watched us struggle and grow and reach toward the stars. And you chose to do nothing. Sefka felt shame burn through her. The crew stood frozen, unable to look at each other. We could have been angry. Many of us were, at first. To be judged and found wanting by species we had never met. To be quarantined like a disease and left to suffer alone. It would have been easy to let hatred consume us. Some of our people wanted war. Others wanted to withdraw completely and forget that anyone else existed in the universe. But in the end, we chose a different path. The message paused there, the glow of the device pulsing softly in the darkness of the empty library. "I will tell you what we chose," Elena said, "and why. But first, I want you to understand something important. We forgave you, not because you deserved it, not because what you did was right. We forgave you because holding onto anger would have destroyed us, and we refused to let your abandonment define who we became. Now listen carefully. What I am about to tell you will change everything you thought you knew about humanity and about yourselves." The message continued, and Thelena's voice filled the empty library, steady and clear despite the weight of what she was revealing. The crew of the expedition stood motionless around the glowing pedestal, afraid to miss a single word. When we discovered the truth about the Concorde's quarantine, we faced a choice that would define our species forever. We could rage against the injustice of it. We could turn inward and pretend the galaxy did not exist. Or we could do something that no one expected. We chose to prove you wrong about us. The message paused, and Sethka heard Elena take a breath before continuing. "You thought we were too violent, too primitive, too dangerous to join your galactic community. You looked at our wars and our weapons and decided we would never be anything more than a threat to be contained. But you only saw part of who we were. You saw our capacity for destruction, but you missed our capacity for growth. In the decades after we learned the truth, humanity changed more than we had in all the centuries before. We did not stop fighting because you told us to. We stopped because we finally understood what was at stake. The universe was watching, and we refused to give it a reason to fear us. Wars ended. Not quickly, not easily, but they ended. Old hatreds were buried. Nations that had been enemies for generations found ways to work together. It was messy and difficult, and we made many mistakes along the way. But slowly, step by step, we became something new. Mira, the scientist, was recording everything, her 3 eyes glistening with moisture. Even Thane, the old warrior who had seen so much violence in his long life, stood with his head bowed. Within a century of discovering the quarantine, we had unified our planet. One government, one purpose, one dream. And with that unity came something else. Progress like nothing we had ever achieved before. You see, when humans stop fighting each other, we become very good at solving problems. We poured all the energy we had wasted on war into science and exploration. Within 50 years, we had developed technologies that matched anything in the Concorde. Within 100 years, we had surpassed them. Sethka remembered the asteroid belt, the impossible geometric patterns carved across millions of kilometers. Now she understood. The humans had not been primitives struggling to reach their moon. They had become something far greater. We developed faster-than-light travel. We created artificial intelligences that worked alongside us as partners. We learned to manipulate matter at the atomic level, to generate energy from nothing, to heal diseases that had plagued us for millennia. We became what you feared we might become, powerful beyond your imagination. And then we faced another choice. Elena's voice softened, taking on a gentler quality. We could have broken the quarantine. We could have demanded our place in the Concorde, proved our worth through force if necessary. With our new technology, we could have conquered half the galaxy before anyone knew what was happening. Some of our people wanted exactly that. They argued that we had earned the right to take what had been denied to us. But most of us saw things differently. What was the point of joining a community that would only accept us if we threatened them? What kind of victory would that be? Bought with the same violence that had made you fear us in the first place? So we made a different choice. We decided to help you without asking for anything in return. Sethka's breath caught in her throat. She looked at the others and saw the same confusion on their faces. For 70 years, humanity worked in secret across the galaxy. We watched over civilizations that did not know we existed. We protected species that had voted to abandon us. And we never asked for recognition or gratitude. The message began describing specific events, incidents that had been recorded in Concorde history as fortunate accidents or unexplained phenomena. In the year you call 2847, an asteroid the size of a small moon was on a collision course with the Velthrani homeworld. Your scientists did not detect it until it was too late to stop, but the asteroid changed course 3 days before impact, deflecting just enough to miss your planet completely. Your astronomers called it a miracle of gravitational dynamics. Sefka felt cold. She remembered that story from her childhood. Her grandmother had spoken of the Great Deliverance, the day when the gods themselves had saved the Velthrani from extinction. It was not a miracle. It was us, a human ship, cloaked and hidden, pushed that asteroid out of your path. The crew never returned home. They gave their lives to save a world that had voted to leave humanity in quarantine. The examples continued, one after another. In 2901, a plague swept through the Korvathi colonies. It was killing millions, and your doctors could not find a cure. Then a researcher discovered a compound in a plant that had never shown medicinal properties before. She said it came to her in a dream, but the formula was too complex to have been invented by accident. Thane's scales had gone pale. Sefkin knew his people's history. The Great Plague had killed over 60 million Korvathi before the cure was found. If what Elena was saying was true, humanity had saved his entire species. We left the formula where it would be found. We did the same for the Malhari when their sun began to destabilize, using technology to calm the stellar flares that would have sterilized their world. We did it for the Delthani when their ancient enemies found their hidden colonies and prepared to attack. We warned them in ways they could not trace, gave them time to prepare their defenses. Over and over, we intervened, never for credit, never for reward, simply because we believed that those who could help had an obligation to do so. Mira was weeping openly now, her recording device forgotten. The truth was too large to process, too heavy to carry. You might wonder why we did this. Why help species that had abandoned us? Why save worlds that would never know our names? Elena's voice grew thoughtful, philosophical. The answer is simple, even if it is hard to believe. We did it because helping others is who we wanted to be. When we discovered the quarantine, we had a choice about what kind of species we would become. We could let your rejection make us bitter and cruel, or we could prove that humanity deserved better than what you gave us. We chose to be the civilization that helps without expecting reward, the species that protects without demanding recognition. We wanted to be worthy of the stars, even if no one else knew it. The message shifted again, and Elena's tone became more personal. I'm telling you this not to make you feel guilty, though I suspect you do. I am telling you because you need to understand what came next. You need to know why we are gone and what we left behind. After 70 years of secret guardianship, humanity reached a crossroads. Our technology had continued advancing far beyond anything we had imagined. We learned things about the universe that changed our understanding of existence itself. We discovered that consciousness does not require a physical form, that energy and matter are just different expressions of the same underlying reality, that death, as most species understand it, is not an ending, but a transformation. We learned how to transcend. Sefka felt a chill run through her. She had heard legends of species that ascended beyond physical existence, but they were just stories, myths told to children about beings who became one with the universe. The process is difficult to explain to those who have not experienced it. Imagine your consciousness expanding beyond the limits of your brain, your awareness spreading across space and time, until you perceive everything as a single interconnected whole. Imagine shedding your physical form like a snake sheds its skin, not dying but transforming into something greater. That is what we learned to do, and when we achieved it, we faced one final choice. Elena's voice slowed, weighted with the importance of what she was about to say. We could stay in the physical universe. We could guide the younger species, protect them openly, teach them what we had learned. With our new abilities, we could have ended all war, all suffering, all struggle. We could have created a perfect galaxy where nothing bad ever happened again. But that would have been wrong. Every species deserves the chance to grow on its own terms, to make mistakes and learn from them, to struggle and fail and eventually triumph through their own efforts. That is the right you denied us when you quarantined Earth, and we refused to do the same thing to you. So we chose to leave, not because we did not care about you, but because we cared too much to take away your freedom to choose your own path." The message paused, and when Elena spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. "Before we transcended, we prepared this world for you. We preserved our cities, our libraries, our art and music and literature. We left behind everything we had learned about science and technology, freely given to whoever came looking. Consider it our final gift to a galaxy that never thanked us for anything. Most of my people have already gone. I am one of the last few who remain to record this message. Soon I will join them, and Earth will be empty of human life forever. But before I go, there is one more thing I need to tell you. One more truth that you must hear." The glow of the pedestal brightened, and Elena's voice filled the library with absolute clarity. "We forgive you. We forgive you for the quarantine. We forgive you for the silence. We forgive you for watching us struggle." But as Sefka settled into her chair and prepared for the next leg of their journey, she allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The humans were gone, boo. But as Sefka settled into her chair and prepared for the next leg of their journey, she allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The humans were gone. Both months that followed the broadcast of Elena's message were unlike anything the galaxy had ever experienced. Sefka had transmitted the recording across all Concord frequencies before even reaching the capital, and by the time the formal vote was taken, every species in the known universe had already heard humanity's final words. The reaction was chaos. On Velthrin, Sefka's home world, millions gathered in the streets to hold vigils for the species that had saved them from the asteroid. Temples that had celebrated the Great Deliverance as a divine miracle now erected monuments to human astronauts who had died pushing a rock the size of a moon out of their path. Children learned new songs about the silent guardians who had protected their ancestors. On the Korvathi homeworld, the response was even more dramatic. The Great Plague that had killed 60 million people was now revealed as a near-extinction event. That humanity had stopped. Warriors who had spent their lives believing in strength and conquest found themselves questioning everything. Some refused to accept the truth, calling it propaganda or lies, but most looked at the evidence and could not deny what they saw. Old records were re-examined across the galaxy. Scientists and historians worked together to trace every anomaly, every fortunate coincidence, every inexplicable event that had saved lives over the past 2 centuries. The list grew longer every day. A solar flare that should have sterilized the Malhari colony worlds had somehow calmed at the last moment. A coalition fleet heading to attack the Delthani had received mysterious warnings that allowed them to escape. A deadly plague on a remote station had been cured by a formula that appeared in a researcher's notes with no explanation of how it got there. Humanity had been everywhere, doing everything, saving everyone, and no one had ever known. The guilt that swept through the Concord was overwhelming. Species that had voted for the quarantine 300 years ago now faced accusations from their own people. How could you abandon them? How could you leave them to die? And when you did, how did they respond? They saved us anyway. Not everyone reacted with shame. Some felt anger instead. The humans had been spying on the Concord, interfering in their affairs without permission. Who gave them the right to play God? Who asked them to push asteroids or cure plagues? The arrogance of it was staggering, but these voices were a minority. Most species looked at what humanity had done and felt something they had rarely experienced before: wonder, admiration, and a deep, aching sense of loss for a people they would never meet. Sefka became a symbol of the change that was sweeping through the galaxy. The young archivist who had dug through forgotten records and traveled to a dead world now spoke before crowds of millions. She told Elena's story again and again, making sure that every detail was preserved. She also helped establish the new Council of First Contact, the body that would review pre-threshold species and decide how the Concord should approach them. No more quarantines. No more judgments based on a species' worst moments. Instead, there would be evaluation, guidance, and help for those who needed it. It was not perfect. There were arguments about how much help was appropriate, about whether species should be allowed to develop naturally or be guided toward peace. Some of the old fears remained, but the conversation had changed. The example of humanity hung over every debate, a reminder of what could happen when a young species was abandoned. Thane retired from public life after the first few months. The old warrior had seen enough of politics and speeches. He returned to his home colony and spent his remaining years teaching young Korvathi about humanity's example. Strength is not measured in weapons, he told them. It is measured in the choice to help those who cannot help you in return. Mira continued her scientific work, leading teams that studied the knowledge humanity had left behind. There was enough material to keep researchers busy for generations. Technologies that could transform medicine, energy production, space travel, even the understanding of consciousness itself. The humans had given freely what other species would have hoarded or sold. 5 years after Elena's message first played in the central chamber, something remarkable happened. A signal was detected from a distant arm of the galaxy. It was crude, primitive, broadcast on basic radio frequencies. Mathematical sequences followed by images and sounds. Messages thrown into the void by a species that did not know if anyone was listening. The signal came from a small blue-green world orbiting a yellow star. The inhabitants called themselves the Vreth, and they were reaching out for the first time, hoping to find friends among the stars. Sefka was in the central chamber when the news arrived. She watched the representatives react, saw the old fear flicker in some eyes. The Vreth broadcasts showed a species at war with itself, just like humanity had been. They had weapons capable of destroying their world. They were dangerous, unpredictable, violent, and yet, the Korvathi counselor rose from his seat, the same one who had once demanded to know if Elena's message was true. His scales were no longer pale with shame. They had settled into a deeper color, the Korvathi shade of resolved purpose. "We faced this choice before," he said, his voice carrying through the silent chamber. 300 years ago, we looked at a species much like this one. We saw their wars and their weapons, and we decided they were too dangerous to approach. We quarantined them and left them alone. He paused, looking around at the assembled representatives. We all know what happened next. They became greater than us. They saved our lives without asking for recognition. They forgave us for our cowardice and then gave us everything they had learned. And when they transcended, they asked us for only one thing. He activated a recording, and Elena's voice filled the chamber once more. When the next young species reaches out to the stars, do not turn away. Do not judge them by their worst moments. Help them become what they could be. The counselor let the words hang in the air before continuing. I move that we answer the Vreth signal. I move that we send ships not to quarantine them, but to make contact, to offer guidance, to help them grow. The debate was shorter than anyone expected. Voices that would once have argued for caution and isolation now spoke of opportunity and obligation. The example of humanity was too fresh, too powerful to ignore. The vote was unanimous. Sefka was asked to lead the contact mission. She accepted without hesitation. Months later, her ship emerged from faster-than-light travel in the Vreth system. A small blue-green world hung in the view screen, achingly similar to the images of Earth she had studied so carefully. Oceans and continents and swirling clouds. A beautiful world that did not know how close it had come to being abandoned, that not this time. She broadcast a greeting in the languages her scientists had decoded from the Vreth signals. She told them that they were not alone, that the galaxy had heard their call. She offered friendship, guidance, hoped that the response came within hours. Confused, excited, frightened, and hopeful, the Vreth sent back a message of their own. They wanted to know everything. Who were these visitors? What did they want? Was there really life among the stars? Sefka answered their questions one by one. She told them about the Concord, about the many species that shared the galaxy. And she told them about humanity, that she told them about a species that had reached out just like them, full of hope and curiosity. She told them about the quarantine and the silence, the abandonment and the forgiveness. She told them about 70 years of secret guardianship and the choice to transcend rather than conquer. And she told them about Elena's message, the final words of a species that had chosen to be worthy of the stars, even when the stars did not choose them back. They asked us to do better, Sefka said, her voice carrying across the void to a world that was just beginning its journey. They asked us to help the next young species find their way. You are that species, and we are here to help." The VREF leader's response was simple and overwhelmed with emotion. "Why? Why would you help us when you do not know who we will become?" Sefka smiled, though the VREF could not see it. "Because the humans showed us that helping is its own reward. Because they believe that every species deserves a chance to grow. And because we owe them a debt we can never repay, except by passing their gift forward." There was silence on the channel for a long moment. When the VREF spoke again, their voice was thick with wonder. "These humans, they sound like they were extraordinary. They were, and they still are, somewhere beyond our understanding. They transcended physical existence, but I like to think they are still watching, still hoping that we learn from their example." Sefka looked out at the blue-green world before her, at the new species taking its first steps toward the stars. The galaxy had made a terrible mistake with humanity. It had abandoned the very species that would one day save them all. But mistakes could be corrected, lessons could be learned, and the legacy of humanity could live on in every act of kindness, every offer of help, every choice to forgive instead of hate. Alana had asked the galaxy to do better, and finally, 300 years too late, but not too late to matter. The galaxy was answering. Sefka opened a new channel and began the long process of guiding the VREF.